Hello, Bob Van Rossum with Market Crow, and we put out a video a little while ago about the rise and the fall of the Chief Growth Officer, or is the Chief Growth Officer becoming obsolete? And we're getting a lot of questions around that, which is why this video is kind of a follow-up to that. And as the premier boutique marketing executive search firm, we do a lot of work for Chief Marketing Officers, obviously, but Chief Growth Officer is another role that we routinely recruit for. And it's honestly the most misunderstood role in the C-suite, and the one where the title is most likely to be used incorrectly. And so what we find is that in the right application, it is incredibly powerful role. And in the wrong application, it is most likely to mask other problems inside the organization. So let's start by understanding what is the Chief Growth Officer, right? So Chief Growth Officer will be someone who ends up overseeing marketing, sales, product, and customer success. And sometimes we've had clients call us and say, I need a Chief Growth Officer. And they're only going to own marketing and product. Well, that's not the Chief Growth Officer. Let's just call that new person the Chief Marketing and Product Officer, and that will be the right title for that role, and that will allow us to also recruit the right type of talent. Because once we start using the incorrect title, we're not going to end up with the right talent in the role. And we've had other instances where someone will call us and they really just want the person to own marketing and, overall, sales enablement or a component of sales that's more tactical, whereas the Chief Sales Officer can own strategy. And that's also not a Chief Growth Officer, right? So what's really important is that we understand when and where the application of the role is positive and when we may just be masking other issues. So when do you need a Chief Growth Officer and when do you not need it? So let's say you're in most companies, you're 90% of organizations out there, and you're growing 8 to 15% a year. And you have a really good culture that allows for collaboration across the organization, so there's not silos that are building up within the organization. And you have a strong person in marketing, sales, product, and customer success leading each of those areas, then there should be no need for a Chief Growth Officer. Now, if one of those areas isn't working and therefore growth is stagnating as a result, because sales isn't taking the leads that marketing is driving and converting them, well, then you don't need a Chief Growth Officer. You need a new Chief Sales Officer, right? Or marketing's not driving the return on advertising spend and your customer acquisition costs are too high compared to your industry and your peers, then you don't need a Chief Growth Officer. You need a new Chief Marketing Officer. And what we commonly find is that you'll have a Chief Marketing Officer, a Chief Sales Officer, a Chief Product Officer that's been with the organization a long time. And those things have worked, right? So historically, growth has been good, and now growth is stalling. And so we like this person. This person's been with us a long time, and historically, they've done a good job, but now it's stopped working. So maybe we need a Chief Growth Officer. And most likely, what you need is a new person in one of those areas, because the individual that's in that area is no longer keeping up with the pace of change that's going on across all of corporate America. And so if 80%, 90% of the time, most organizations, a Chief Growth Officer is not the right role, when then are the applications? And when do you need someone that can be a Chief Growth Officer to create alignment across all of those areas, facilitate growth in a way that maximizes the organization's capability? And the first application is in really high growth companies. So if you're growing more than 25% annually, and you expect that to be the case for the next 4, 5, 10 years, then that velocity of growth is the perfect application for a Chief Growth Officer. Someone to come in and say, okay, we've got a very high performing head of marketing, Chief Marketing Officer. We've got a very high performing head of product or Chief Product Officer. Same for sales, same for customer success. But we're moving so quickly, we need someone to coordinate cross-functionally to make sure that we have complete alignment with our data, how we're utilizing our data, to make sure that we're enabling growth at the maximum rate possible, especially if we're competing with other organizations in our industry that are growing just as fast, right? So we're now trying to be a step ahead and create a competitive advantage for the way we scale, and the way this growth that is extremely rapid is going to be able to work across the organization. That's a good application for a chief growth officer. Another good application is an organization where we are only growing 8, 10, 12% a year. And I really need someone to come in and focus on, innovation, net new products. So we're going to create a subscription line where we haven't had a subscription line before. And someone to come in and focus on M&A. That's the second really good application for a chief growth officer is, I'm not looking for someone to fix marketing in our organization because I have a good chief marketing officer, or I'm not looking for someone to fix sales or product or customer success. I'm looking for someone to grow us, to be a chief growth officer for net new areas. So their focus is on innovation, their focus is on mergers and acquisitions, and their focus is on net new business models, be it a subscription model or something similar, or going into e-commerce, where e-commerce, we've never done that before. And that's someone who can come in and enable those things. So those are really your two applications where a chief growth officer can be utilized properly. And if we're just trying to layer, right, our chief sales officer or chief marketing officer, or both, to have a chief growth officer between them and the CEO, we're probably misusing that role, misusing that title, and we're probably just going to mask other problems. So the other mistake we see organizations make relative to the chief growth officer is they're not happy with where growth is as an organization. And they think they can utilize the chief growth officer role to replace one or more of the chief marketing officer, the chief sales officer, the chief product officer, and the head of customer success. And at the end of the day, you're not really solving your growth problem at that point by eliminating someone who runs part of your organization and hoping that you can add more direct reports to your now newly named chief growth officer, but the role and the responsibilities is fundamentally the same. You're just adding two roles into one person. We've seen that tried. We've always coached our clients against going down that path. And ultimately, it's not a path that's going to be successful to enable long-term organizational growth. You still need, as an organization, right? I need a head of marketing. I need a head of sales. I need a head of product. I need a head of customer success. And that will vary somewhat depending on your industry, but generically, that's a true statement. And the chief growth officer is not someone that's going to replace those roles in the right applications. It's someone that's going to add value to the organization in other ways.